June 1943. Paris is silent, strangled by fear. The clock on Rue de la Faisanderie ticks past midnight. Street lamps glow dim under German curfew, their yellow halos falling on cobblestones wet with drizzle. A Gestapo patrol passes, boots echoing in rhythm, rifles glinting beneath their greatcoats. Behind a shuttered window, in a small attic apartment overlooking a courtyard, a young woman kneels beside a suitcase-sized radio set. Her fingers tremble as she adjusts the frequency dial. Each movement is slow, deliberate. She listens to the hiss of static, the pulse of danger, and the sound of her own heartbeat. Her name is Noor Inayat Khan. The world will one day call her the spy princess. But tonight, she's simply a signal, one faint, defiant voice cutting through the airwaves of Nazi Europe. Before she was a spy, Noor was a dreamer. Born in Moscow in 1914, to an Indian father and an American mother, she grew up in the quiet elegance of Paris. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was a Sufi mystic, a man who believed in the harmony of all faiths. Noor inherited his calm voice and his belief in peace. She played the harp, wrote children's stories, and spoke softly, almost shyly, in 3 languages. But when the world burned, peace was no longer enough. In 1940, the German army marched into France. Noor's family fled to England, carrying what little they could. In London, she joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, training as a radio operator. Her superiors noticed her quiet intelligence, her patience with machines, and her fluency in French. And then came a question that would change her life. Would she volunteer for special duties, the kind that required courage, secrecy, and the willingness to disappear? Churchill's Secret Army. That's what the few who knew called it, though officially, it was the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. Their mission: set Europe ablaze. Noor signed the secrecy oath without hesitation. She was given a new name, a new background, and a new purpose. Her code name, Madeline. Her assignment, to be dropped into occupied France as a wireless operator for the resistance. It was one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. Every transmission could betray her. The Gestapo had vans equipped with radio detection equipment. If they triangulated her signal, they'd be at her door within minutes. The average life expectancy of a radio operator in France? 6 weeks. And yet Noor accepted. Training was brutal. Morse code drills, sabotage tactics, map reading under pressure. She wasn't the strongest of the recruits, she was gentle, even hesitant with a pistol, but she was determined. Her instructors noted her spiritual calm, but some doubted her toughness. One officer wrote, "She's too sensitive for this work." But sensitivity, she would soon prove, could be a form of strength. In the quiet of the training huts, when others smoked and joked, Noor sat alone with her wireless set, tapping out endless streams of code until her fingers ached. She didn't think of glory or revenge. She thought of the people she had left behind in France, the mothers and children under occupation, and of her father's teachings, that service to humanity was the highest calling. If her radio could help free them, she would risk everything. June 16, 1943, the night of the drop. The moon hung low over northern France as the RAF bomber flew beneath German radar. In the cargo hold, Noor waited with her parachute strapped on, her radio packed in a suitcase beside her. Her mission: join the Prosper Network, one of SOE's largest resistance groups operating around Paris. The pilot's voice came through the intercom, "Drop zone in 2 minutes." Noor took a deep breath. This was it. No second chances. If she was caught, she would vanish into a Gestapo prison, or worse, disappear into one of their camps. The green light blinked on. She jumped. Cold air tore past her face. The fields below were patches of black and silver. The parachute opened with a jolt, and she drifted silently toward occupied France. For a moment, it was peaceful, almost serene. Then, a distant rumble reminded her of the war she was falling into. She landed roughly, gathered her chute, and signaled to the waiting resistance contact with a tiny flashlight blink. 3 short, 2 long, the agreed code. The man approached from the shadows. "Bienvenue à la France, Mademoiselle Madeline," he whispered. Noor smiled faintly. "It's good to be home." The first weeks went smoothly. Noor set up her radio in safe houses across Paris at cafes, laundries, attics. She transmitted at odd hours, moving constantly to avoid detection. Her messages, encoded with her personal cipher poem, carried vital intelligence back to London, German troop movements, supply routes, airfield maps. But even as she sent out her signals, the net around her was tightening. The Prosper network she joined, one of SOE's most critical resistance cells, was collapsing. Betrayals, arrests, and executions followed one after another. The Gestapo, led by a man named Hans Kiefer, was hunting every operator in Paris. Within a month, most of Noor's contacts were dead or captured. She was offered an evacuation back to England. London feared she'd be caught next. But Noor refused. "I cannot leave," she radioed back. "I am the last link." Now, each transmission could be her last. She moved constantly rooftop to cellar, attic to bakery, carrying her 12-kilogram radio set, disguised as a suitcase. Sometimes she broadcast from rooms still warm from their former occupants arrested hours before. She knew that the Gestapo's direction-finding vans roamed the streets, their antennas sniffing for the invisible signals she sent. She kept each transmission under 20 minutes, then vanished before the detectors could close in. But the danger wasn't only from machines. It was from people. Informers, double agents, even frightened neighbors who might whisper to the Gestapo for a loaf of bread. Still, she persisted, her calm voice echoing in the headphones of British operators across the channel. From Madeleine. Transmission follows. Those were the words London listened for, night after night, proof that, somewhere in occupied Paris, one woman still fought, still hoped, still sent the signal. One evening, as rain swept through Montmartre, Noor crouched by her radio in an abandoned apartment. The message she was sending carried the coordinates of a hidden German supply depot, intelligence that could change the course of the Allied bombing campaign. The rain masked the soft hum of her transmitter. Outside, a German patrol passed, boots splashing through puddles. Noor didn't breathe. She kept tapping, her fingers steady, her face illuminated only by the faint glow of the valve tubes. Then a sound. A knock on the door below. A voice, muffled but distinct, "Ouvrez." "Polizei." Her blood froze. Had they found her? The knocking turned to pounding. She looked at her radio, still transmitting, and then at the window. The message was halfway through. To cut it now would mean London wouldn't receive it. She had seconds to decide, finish the signal, or run. The pounding grew louder. "Open, or we break it down." Noor took a deep breath, whispered a prayer her father had taught her, La ilaha illallah, and kept transmitting. The message had to go through. The signal reached London at 22:07 hours. It was complete. And moments later, the apartment door splintered under rifle butts. German boots thundered up the stairs. Noor grabbed her radio case and dashed to the roof. Rain hammered the tiles. She ran barefoot, slipping, clutching the heavy suitcase. Searchlights swept the streets below. Shouts echoed behind her. She leapt across a narrow alley onto the next roof, barely making it, and disappeared into the shadows of occupied Paris. Below, the Gestapo found only an empty room, a still warm transmitter, and a half-drained teacup. The woman they were hunting, the voice they called Madeleine, had vanished into the night. But the Gestapo wouldn't stop. They knew now, a radio was still alive in Paris. And they would burn the city to find it. Paris, late summer 1943. The nights were getting colder, and the city pulsed with unease. Every street corner whispered of betrayal. Every shadow seemed to carry the echo of boots. Somewhere in those shadows, Noor Inayat Khan was still transmitting. To the Gestapo, she was nothing more than a phantom, a nameless operator whose signals danced through the ether and vanished before their detectors could find her. To London, she was a miracle. The last surviving wireless link to the Paris resistance. Each of her messages was a thread of light across occupied Europe, coordinates, reports, names, plans, all sent in code, all written in the calm, patient rhythm of her hand. But the walls were closing in. At the Gestapo headquarters on Avenue Foch, a man named Hans Kiefer stood over a map of Paris. He was a tall, calculating officer, his eyes cold behind thin spectacles. Red pins marked the locations of captured radio operators. Only one sector remained active. Madeline, he muttered, tracing the area with his finger. The last ghost. His aide approached, holding a file. Herr Kiefer, we've picked up a transmission pattern, short bursts, irregular intervals. It's the same signature as before. Kiefer smiled faintly. She's clever. But clever people make mistakes. They grow tired. They trust the wrong person. He closed the file. Find her. Meanwhile, Noor had taken refuge in a small bookshop near Saint-Germain. The owner, an elderly woman named Madame Perrin, was a resistance sympathizer. She gave Noor a tiny backroom lined with dusty novels and poetry, a perfect cover for a radio transmitter. Every night, Noor set up her set among stacks of books, sending her coded messages to London while the city outside slept. Sometimes she'd pause to listen, not to the radio waves, but to the silence between them. That was where fear lived. On some nights, she'd hear faint music drifting through the window, a violinist playing in a nearby cafe for the German officers. It reminded her of the world before the war. The one she was fighting to bring back. But spies can't live on memories. They live on trust, and in Noor's world, trust was a currency that could kill. One of her few remaining contacts, Ernest, a resistance courier, brought her word of a possible new safe house. It's in Passy, he whispered one night, rain dripping from his coat. Secure. The owner's a friend. You can transmit there without risk. Noor hesitated. Every move was a gamble. Are you sure? She asked softly. Ernest smiled, too quickly. Absolutely. She studied his eyes. Fear flickered there, or was it guilt? But she had little choice. Her current location was compromised, the Gestapo had raided 2 nearby apartments. She packed her radio the next morning. If only she had known. That same evening, across the city, a man slipped into Kiefer's office carrying a brown envelope. Inside were photos, blurred shots of a woman with dark hair, taken from a distance. She calls herself Madeline, the man said. His voice trembled. I can lead you to her. Kiefer smiled thinly. Excellent. You've just bought yourself a very short friendship with the Reich. The man's name was Henri Dericourt, a French double agent officially working for the SOE, secretly feeding the Gestapo. His betrayal would lead to one of the darkest moments in the history of Britain's secret war. 2 days later, Noor arrived at the new safe house. It was quiet, too quiet. The curtains were drawn, the floor recently swept. The man who greeted her was polite, almost rehearsed. Come in, Mademoiselle Madeline. Everything's prepared. She nodded, setting her radio case down. Something felt wrong. The air was heavy, still. She looked at the window, the curtains didn't quite touch the sill. Outside, a faint reflection gleamed like glass. Her stomach dropped. No. The door burst open. 3 men in black uniforms rushed in. Noor grabbed her radio, but one struck her arm. The suitcase fell open, the equipment spilling out. Wires tangled, tubes shattered. Don't move, one shouted in German. She turned and saw the man who'd betrayed her. Ernest stood in the corner, pale and trembling. Forgive me, he whispered. Noor didn't reply. Her silence was colder than anger. Hands seized her arms, twisting them behind her back. The Gestapo officer pulled her papers from her pocket and smirked. Ah. Madeline. She was dragged down the stairs and into a waiting car. The Gestapo had their prize. At Avenue Foch, Hans Kiefer personally supervised her interrogation. She was calm, even when they stripped her of her belongings, her codes, her false identity papers, her silver bracelet engraved with her initials, NIK. Kiefer leaned forward across the desk. You are British, yes? Sent by London? Noor said nothing. Your real name? Silence. He smiled thinly. You're brave, mademoiselle. But bravery has limits. Everyone talks in the end. Noor looked him in the eye. Her voice was soft, but steady. I will never talk. They kept her under constant guard. At night, she could hear the screams from other prisoners echoing down the corridor. Still, she refused to give them a single name, a single code, a single signal. Instead, she planned. After 3 days, she managed to pick the lock of her cell with a stolen pin. Crawling through the corridor, she reached the roof but was spotted before she could climb down. The guards beat her and threw her back into solitary confinement. Kiefer, furious, ordered her bound in chains. Her hands were cuffed behind her back, day and night. But when she was interrogated again, she smiled faintly. You can chain my hands, she said, but not my will. Back in London, her signal had gone silent. 4 weeks, British intelligence waited. Each night, operators tuned to her frequency, hoping, praying for the sound of her key. But the line remained dead. Until one night, a transmission arrived. Same frequency. Same code phrases. Same sign-off, Madeline. London exhaled in relief. She's alive. But they were wrong. The Gestapo had used her captured codes to send fake messages, luring in other agents, dismantling the network Noor had died to protect. Her radio, the one that had saved lives, was now being used as a weapon. Yet Noor wasn't dead. Not yet. She was alive, and still defiant, somewhere inside the walls of a German prison. And soon, she would attempt the impossible. Paris, autumn, 1943. The nights had grown longer. A chill wind swept through the empty boulevards, carrying the sound of boots, engines, and fear. At number 84, Avenue Foch, the Gestapo headquarters still throbbed with the same cruel rhythm, doors slamming, typewriters clicking, and behind thick walls, the cries of those who refused to break. In the farthest corner of the basement, a small iron cell held one of their most valuable prisoners, Noor Inayat Khan. She had been here for weeks, chained hand and foot, her back bruised from interrogations, her spirit untouched. Every day, the guards tried to coax her into compliance, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with cruelty. And every day, Noor gave them nothing. Not a name. Not a code. Not a single word that could endanger another life. But she had something else in mind. Not surrender, escape. The opportunity came one damp night in late October. Noor had been transferred to a small upper-level cell after her chains were briefly removed for questioning. There, she met 2 other captured SOE agents, John Starr and Leon Fay. Both men had been tortured, but their will to resist remained. When the guards left, Noor whispered, "We can't stay here. They'll send us to Germany next." Leon nodded grimly. "They've already prepared the transport lists. Once we're gone, we vanish forever." Noor's voice hardened. "Then we go before that." Over the next few nights, the 3 of them devised a plan. They studied guard rotations, memorized footsteps, and timed the patrols in the corridor. Noor, ever calm, took the lead. She had once written stories about courage. Now she was living one. Their cell door had a faulty lock, the latch didn't catch fully. Using a stolen table knife, Noor managed to twist the inner mechanism just enough to slip it open. But the hardest part wasn't the lock. It was the silence. Any noise could mean discovery and execution. So, they waited for a storm. October 23, 1943. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder rumbled over Paris. At midnight, Noor gave the signal. 3 soft taps on the stone wall. They moved like ghosts. The corridor was dark, the only light a flickering lamp at the far end. Noor led the way barefoot, the cold biting her skin. They crept past the guards' quarters, hearts hammering. Every creak, every echo, felt like a gunshot. They reached the service staircase and froze. Footsteps. A guard's voice echoed from below. "Alice in Ordnung?" Another answered, "Ja, Alice Ruhig." They waited. The voices faded. Noor exhaled slowly and motioned forward. Step by step, they climbed toward the roof. From there, they reached a ventilation shaft leading out to the building's rear courtyard. The cover was bolted but rusted. Leon pried at it with the knife, metal screeching softly. Noor whispered, "Hurry." Finally, the bolt snapped. One by one, they crawled through the narrow duct, knees scraping, lungs tight. The smell of dust and oil filled the air. When they emerged, the night sky stretched above them, black clouds torn by lightning. Freedom! They ran for the wall bordering the courtyard. If they could climb it, they'd be in the back streets of Paris. But fate had other plans. A shout. Searchlights blazed. Halt! Gunfire tore through the rain. John fell, hit in the shoulder. Leon dragged him back behind the wall. Noor turned, defiant, eyes blazing. "Go!" Leon shouted. "Run!" But she didn't. She couldn't. She looked at her wounded comrades and stayed. The guards surrounded them within minutes. They were beaten, dragged back inside, and thrown into solitary confinement. The Gestapo chief was livid. He stormed into her cell. "You tried to escape again? After everything we've done for you?" Noor stared at him, bruised but unbroken. "You can imprison the body," she said quietly, "but not the spirit." Kiefer slammed his fist on the desk. "You will regret this, Fräulein Madeline." She simply smiled. From that day, Noor was labeled highly dangerous. She was kept in total isolation. Her hands and feet were shackled 24 hours a day. She was forbidden to speak to other prisoners. Her meals were pushed through a small slot in the door. Yet, the guards noticed something strange. Even in silence, she seemed to glow with calm defiance. She'd hum softly Sufi hymns her father had taught her, melodies that drifted through the cold corridor like a quiet rebellion. The other prisoners, hearing that faint song, began to call her the Nightingale. Word of her capture eventually reached London. When it did, a single line was added to the SOE files. Madeline presumed lost. Outstanding courage. They didn't know that she was still alive, still planning, still refusing to break. And soon, the war would shift again. In the spring of 1944, with Allied forces preparing for the invasion of Normandy, the Gestapo began transferring their special prisoners to Germany. Among them, Noor Inayat Khan. The day they took her from Paris was cold and gray. Her wrists were chained to another prisoner as they boarded the train. She looked out the window, at the city she had fought for, the rooftops, the river, the people who never knew her name. For a moment, she smiled faintly. Because even though the Gestapo believed they were erasing her, her signals, the ones she had sent months before, had already changed the course of the war. Her messages had helped the Allies identify German troop positions in northern France, aiding the resistance that would rise again when D-Day came. Her radio had done what it was meant to do. It had saved lives. But her story wasn't over. The train rattled eastward into the heart of darkness. Germany, winter, 1944. The train sliced through a frozen landscape. Gray skies hung low over the endless stretch of pine and snow. Inside one of the locked compartments, Noor Inayat Khan sat chained to an iron bench, her wrists raw from the cold metal cuffs. Opposite her sat two Gestapo guards, rifles resting on their knees. Every time she shifted, they glanced up, silent, watchful. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels was the only sound. After days on the rails, the train finally slowed. A sign flickered past in the gloom, Pforzheim. Noor didn't know the name then. But soon, it would become one of the darkest chapters of her life. Pforzheim prison was an old fortress turned detention center, a place for special prisoners. The Gestapo's code for those too valuable, or too dangerous, to be killed quickly. Inside its thick stone walls, the air smelled of iron and damp. The corridors were narrow, the lights dim. When Noor arrived, the warden looked over her papers, name, unknown. Alias, Madeline. Nationality, British. And frowned. She is the one who escaped in Paris? Yes, the guard said. 3 times. Then she will never escape again. They locked her in a windowless cell, a space no larger than a cupboard. Bare walls, no bed, no chair. Just a single straw mattress on the floor. Her ankles and wrists were chained together. She could not stand upright without pain. There was no clock, no calendar. Only darkness and silence. And yet, even here, Noor refused to break. When the guards passed by, they'd sometimes hear a faint tapping, rhythmic, measured. At first, they thought she was breaking down. But the pattern was too deliberate. ... Pause. ... Morse code. She was sending messages not through a radio, but through the walls. Other prisoners began to tap back. Tiny replies, barely audible. Simple words. Courage. Hope. Freedom. In the silence of Pforzheim, Noor had created a new kind of signal, not through machines, but through human will. For months, she endured the same cycle: interrogations, isolation, beatings. Yet the Gestapo never got a word of intelligence from her. Her jailer, a man named Wilhelm Krauss, would later testify after the war. She was the bravest person I ever met. We chained her like an animal, but she never cried. She looked at us with eyes full of dignity. It was as if she belonged to another world. By March 1944, the Allies had begun bombing German industrial cities. Pforzheim, with its factories, was a target. When the sirens wailed and the guards fled for the shelters, Noor remained locked in her cell. The building shook with the blasts, dust falling from the ceiling, glass shattering. And still, she sat calmly in the dark, humming an old melody her father used to sing, the song of peace that had followed her since childhood. After the raid, when the guards returned, they found her smiling faintly. One of them asked, half mocking, "Aren't you afraid to die, Madeline?" She looked up and said softly, "Death is only the end of fear." Back in London, SOE officials were growing desperate for news. Dozens of agents had gone missing across France. Some presumed dead, others unaccounted for. Noor's name remained on that list, missing in action. But even without knowing it, her work still rippled through Europe. Her coded transmissions, sent before her capture, had provided London with the network coordinates that helped the Allies coordinate with resistance groups across northern France. Those signals, brief bursts of hope across the airwaves, had given Allied planners the intelligence they would later use in Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion. The girl who once wrote stories for children had helped write a new story for Europe, one of resistance and redemption. By summer, the Gestapo had made a decision. The war was turning against them. Allied forces were closing in from the west, Soviet troops were advancing from the east. The order was clear: evacuate all special prisoners to Germany. Use them as leverage or eliminate them if necessary. Among those on the transfer list, Noor Inayat Khan. She was taken from Pforzheim in chains once again, this time not by train, but by a small convoy heading deeper into Germany. The guards said nothing about their destination. But in a Gestapo memo dated September 1944, her name appeared next to one chilling word: Dachau. During the long journey south, Noor sat in silence. She knew what Dachau meant. Everyone did. Still, there was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. One of the guards, years later, recalled that she stared out of the truck window at the German countryside and whispered to herself in English, "I am still free inside." When the convoy reached the camp, the sky was gray and low. The air smelled of smoke. Behind the barbed wire, emaciated prisoners moved like shadows, their striped uniforms hanging loose on their bones. As the gate clanged shut behind her, Noor looked up at the iron arch that read, "Arbeit macht frei." It would be the last place she would ever see. Dachau concentration camp, September 12, 1944. A thick fog clung to the ground that morning, curling around the barbed wire fences like smoke. Beyond the gate, a truck rolled to a stop. 4 prisoners were ordered to step down. Among them was a thin woman with dark eyes and cropped black hair. Her uniform hung loosely, the blue-gray fabric stained and torn. The SS officer checked his list. Prisoner 550, Madeline. Noor Inayat Khan didn't flinch. Her hands were bound, but her back was straight. The officer studied her for a moment. "This one's the radio girl?" "Yes," came the reply. "The English woman. Very dangerous." The officer smirked. "Dangerous? She looks like a child." But there was something about her gaze that made even hardened soldiers look away. Calm, unbroken, unafraid. Inside the camp, whispers spread quickly. "They've brought new prisoners from Paris. Political ones. Special orders from Berlin." The other inmates watched as Noor and the three women with her, Yolande Beekman, Madeleine Demerment, and Elaine Pluman, were led to the punishment block. They were kept separate from the general population, under strict guard. For days, they were questioned. Not about themselves, the war was almost over, and the Gestapo already knew who they were. The questions were crueler now, pointless almost. Designed not to gather information, but to break the spirit. Noor refused to answer. Not one word. When they demanded her name, she said only, "I am Madeleine." On the evening of September 12, a storm rolled in over Bavaria. Rain lashed the roofs of the barracks. Lightning flashed against the wire fences, illuminating the watchtowers in ghostly bursts. In one of the small cells of the punishment block, Noor sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her eyes closed. The guards had left her alone for the night. Somewhere outside, thunder rumbled. It sounded almost like distant artillery, the kind that might have been echoing from the front lines of France, where the Allies were now advancing. Noor imagined the sound was coming from them, from the liberators she'd once sent signals to, through her little radio hidden under the floorboards of a Paris apartment. She pictured her radio, the smell of hot vacuum tubes, the faint hum of electricity. The night she first whispered into the microphone. "This is Madeleine. Standing by." She could almost feel it again, the weight of the Morse key beneath her fingertips, the rhythm of her code, the pulse of hope it carried across the airwaves. Even now, locked in a concrete cell hundreds of miles away, she felt that connection. Invisible, but unbroken. She still had her signal. At dawn, the guards came. 4 women were taken from their cells and lined up in the courtyard. The rain had stopped, but the ground was slick with mud. One of the SS men lit a cigarette. Another read from a piece of paper an order from Berlin signed by Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler himself. It was short, clinical, bureaucratic. "The following female prisoners are to be executed immediately for espionage." The women said nothing. They already knew. As they were led to a clearing near the crematorium, Noor turned to the others and gave a small nod, no tears, no words, just that single look. When her turn came, she refused the blindfold. The SS officer in charge, Wilhelm Ruppert, raised his pistol. He hesitated for a moment. "What was your name again?" he asked quietly. Noor looked him in the eye. "Liberté," she said. "Freedom." A single gunshot broke the morning air. She fell without a sound. Her body was cremated within the hour. No marker, no grave. Only her name, Madeleine, entered into a line of a Gestapo report, filed away and forgotten among thousands of others. But that was not the end. Because in the months that followed, her name began to surface again, not on Gestapo lists, but in whispers across Europe. In coded letters among the resistance. In fragments of stories told by survivors of Pforzheim and Dachau. They all said the same thing. There was a woman who never broke. She sent hope through the air. Her courage was a signal we could all hear. In May 1945, the war ended. Germany surrendered. Dachau was liberated. Allied investigators combed through the wreckage, piecing together what had happened inside its walls. Among the documents found was a note, unsigned and nearly illegible, describing 4 English women executed by special order. At the bottom of the list was a single word, Madeleine. The name sent a chill through the officers who found it, because in London, that was the code name of a missing SOE agent whose last transmission had been received more than a year earlier. "This is Madeleine, standing by." Her final message had never been followed by another. Until now. Back in London, Vera Atkins, Nor's superior at SOE, wept when she read the report. For months, she had refused to believe Nor was dead. She was too bright, Atkins said. Too full of life to vanish like that. But she hadn't vanished. Her signal had simply traveled farther than anyone could trace, beyond the reach of static, beyond the range of radio waves. It had become something else. A legend. In the years that followed, Noor Inayat Khan was posthumously awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest honor for civilian bravery. France awarded her the Croix de Guerre, with a citation that read, "She refused to betray her comrades. She continued to transmit until capture. She died with the word Liberté upon her lips." Her name was carved into the F-section memorial in Valenque, alongside the 104 other SOE agents who never came home. And in the quiet corner of Bloomsbury, London, where she once trained as a radio operator, a bronze statue now stands, a woman with short hair, her gaze steady, a small radio box at her side. Beneath it, a simple inscription. Noor Inayat Khan. George Cross, Croix de Guerre. 1914 to 1944. The radio that saved Europe. But her story doesn't end there. Because in the archives of the BBC, decades later, an old signal was rediscovered, a faint, crackling transmission recorded accidentally during wartime monitoring. Among the static, one line stood out clearly. "This is Madeleine. Standing by." A signal sent from behind Nazi lines, a signal that, for one brief moment, connected a world divided by tyranny. It was her voice. And across time, it still carried. Title: The Radio That Saved Europe, How One Spy Transmitted from Behind Nazi Lines. Part 6: Aftermath, The Ghost Frequency. Fade in. The war had ended. The guns fell silent. The skies over Europe, once filled with bombers, were now heavy only with clouds and memory. But even as the world tried to rebuild, there remained ghosts. Frequencies that refused to die. Names whispered in coded letters. And one, in particular, that seemed to echo long after her final transmission. "This is Madeleine. Standing by." London, spring 1946. In a quiet office tucked inside Baker Street, the same building that had once hummed with secret operations of the SOE, a small team worked late into the night. Files were stacked on every desk: personnel records, mission logs, missing agents. Among them, a woman in her 40s sat with a cigarette burning down to ash in an untouched tray. Her name was Vera Atkins. She had promised herself and every fallen agent that she would find out what had happened to each one. Her eyes lingered on one file more than the rest. It was thin, worn, almost fragile. On the cover, typed in black ink: Khan, Noor Inayat F-section, Paris. Codename, Madeleine. 4 months, Atkins traced the trail through Gestapo documents, captured SS officers, and the faint testimony of survivors. Everywhere she went, she heard fragments of Noor's final days. A Belgian prisoner recalled a young woman at Pforzheim, always calm, even after the beatings. A guard admitted she had escaped once and refused to give up the others. And finally, in the ruins of Dachau, a surviving prisoner whispered what no one wanted to believe. She was shot. But she shouted before she died. What did she shout? Atkins asked. The man looked at her for a long time, then said softly, "Liberté." Atkins pressed her fingers against her lips, holding back tears. There it was. The final confirmation. Madeleine was gone. But even as she closed the file, she couldn't shake a feeling that somehow Noor's spirit was still transmitting. That feeling grew stronger weeks later, when a technician from the BBC monitoring service brought her a reel of magnetic tape. "We think you should hear this," he said. He placed it on the recorder and pressed play. A crackle. A hiss. Then, faintly, through the static, a voice. "This is Madeleine. Standing by." Atkins froze. It's her," she whispered. The technician nodded. It was recorded in 1943. "We just recovered it from an old archive. It's real." For a long time, they sat in silence as the hum of the radio filled the room. The war had ended, but her voice, the signal of defiance, had survived. Paris, 1947. A small ceremony was held in the garden of the British Embassy. The tricolour of France hung beside the Union Jack. A handful of diplomats, veterans, and family members gathered as an officer read aloud the citation for the Croix de Guerre. When Noor's mother, Begum Inayat Khan, stepped forward to accept the medal, the crowd fell silent. She wore a simple white sari. In her hands, she carried a small framed photograph, Noor in uniform, smiling faintly, her eyes alive with quiet strength. The officer read aloud. She refused to betray her comrades. She continued to transmit until capture. She died for France, for liberty, and for honor. Tears rolled down her mother's face, but she stood tall, like her daughter once had. When the medal was pinned to her chest, the crowd broke into quiet applause. Somewhere in the distance, a radio tower blinked. Its red light flashed against the evening sky, steady, unwavering, rhythmic. France, 1950s, Resistance Survivors Reunion. An old man named Marcel stood by a makeshift memorial wall, tracing the names with his fingers. He stopped when he saw Madeleine. "She saved us," he murmured. When the Gestapo was closing in, her signal told London we needed help. We didn't even know her face, only her code. But we trusted her. Because she never failed. Another veteran nodded. She gave us hope. Every time that little radio blinked, it was like hearing the heartbeat of freedom. They stood there in silence, not in mourning, but in awe. Because they realized something, Noor's courage wasn't only in her death. It was in every signal she ever sent. Every moment she chose to risk her life for a message that might save others. London, 1960s, Cold War era. A new generation of British intelligence officers trained in the same building Noor once did. Most of them didn't know her name, not yet. But in the radio rooms, instructors still told stories. About a woman who carried a radio through the streets of occupied Paris. Who transmitted under bombs and darkness. Who never once compromised her code. They said her ghost still haunted the airwaves. Sometimes, late at night, operators swore they could hear it, a faint pulse of Morse code beneath the static. A rhythm that matched no known transmission. They called it the ghost frequency. // Madeline. No one could ever prove it. But to those who believed, it was a reminder. Freedom is never silent. Scene, 1970, near Bloomsbury, London. An artist set up scaffolding in a small square. The air was crisp, filled with the clang of metal and the hum of traffic. A new statue was being raised, bronze, life-sized, depicting a woman in wartime uniform. Her gaze steady, her posture calm. A small radio box beside her. Crowds gathered as a cloth was pulled away to reveal the figure. The inscription read, Noor Inayat Khan, George Cross. Special Operations Executive. 1914 to 1944. She refused to give up. Children pointed at the statue. Old soldiers stood silently. Some saluted. One woman whispered, "She's still standing by." The screen fades to black. A soft radio hum begins. Static, then faint Morse code. Then Noor's voice again, the same recording. "This is Madeleine. Standing by." The hum grows louder, blending with orchestral strings. The narrator's voice returns. In the darkest days of war, her radio was more than a transmitter. It was a pulse, a signal that told millions that Europe still had a heartbeat. That even in silence, courage could speak. And that freedom, once sent, could never be jammed. Cut to archival footage: Allied troops entering Paris, civilians cheering, the Eiffel Tower free once more. The camera lingers on the crowd, then dissolves into the image of the statue in London, bathed in morning light. Her signal ended in 1944. But her message, it's still out there. In every voice that refuses to be silenced. In every fight for liberty. In every radio hum that carries hope across the air. fade in. Soft Indian music plays, the sound of a sitar, slow and melancholic. Over it, a narrator's voice. Before she was a spy, before the war, before the codename Madeline, she was Noor. The scene dissolves into 1914, Moscow. Snow falls gently over the domes of the city. A baby cries inside a modest home. She is born Noor-Anisa Inayat Khan, to an Indian father and an American mother, two dreamers caught between worlds. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was a Sufi mystic and musician, a man who taught that the soul's purpose was harmony. Her mother, Aura Ray Baker, came from New Mexico, a quiet woman with fire in her heart. Together, they raised Noor and her siblings not as soldiers or patriots, but as seekers of truth. Her father often said, "There is no barrier between nations, only between hearts." Words that would one day guide his daughter into the most dangerous of wars. Scene, France, 1920s. The Inayat family has moved to a house outside Paris, a white villa surrounded by gardens and tall trees. The locals call it Fazal Manzil, a house of blessing. Noor grows up among books and music. She plays the harp, writes poetry, and gazes at the clouds, wondering what it means to be free. In her diary, she writes, "Someday, I wish to serve humanity. But not through violence, through understanding." Her childhood is peaceful. But Europe is not. The winds of fascism are rising. And when war comes, the young poet will be called to serve in a way her gentle heart could never have imagined. London, 1940. Bombs fall nightly. The Blitz has begun. Noor, now in her mid-20s, crosses the rubble-strewn streets to volunteer for the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAF. She becomes a radio operator, learning Morse code, wireless transmission, and navigation. Her superiors note, excellent linguist. Gentle disposition. Unlikely spy material. But one man sees something more. Maurice Buckmaster, head of the Special Operations Executive's French section, reviews her file. He reads her name, Inayat Khan. He learns her father was a Sufi who preached peace, her mother an American who taught compassion. He looks up and says quietly, "Perhaps that's exactly why she should go. A woman who believes in peace fighting to end tyranny, there's power in that." Scene, SOE training, Beaulieu Estate, 1942. Hidden in the woods of southern England, a grand estate has been converted into a secret training school for spies. Here, Noor learns to shoot, to fight, to encode messages, to disappear. At night, when the others sleep, she writes letters to her brother Vilayat. "I do not like the idea of killing, but I will do what I must. Father taught us that truth is greater than fear. And if truth must be protected, then I will stand guard." Her instructors are skeptical. She's too quiet. Too gentle. Too honest. But when it comes to the radio, she's unmatched. Her fingers dance across the Morse key like music. Every signal precise, fluid, alive. One instructor whispers, watching her work. It's not code she's sending. It's a song. Scene, the briefing room, London, 1943. The war in France has reached its peak. The resistance is desperate. London needs someone to go in, to be the wireless link for Paris. Noor volunteers. Buckmaster looks uneasy. "You understand the risk? Radio operators in Paris last less than 6 weeks." Noor nods. "If I don't go, someone else will die in my place. I believe this is what I was meant for." There's a silence. Then Buckmaster says quietly, "Then may God go with you, Madeline." Cut to a plane taking off from RAF Tempsford, under moonlight. The engines roar softly. Noor sits in the back, her parachute on, her eyes closed in prayer. As the plane reaches altitude, the dispatcher shouts, 30 seconds. She rises, looks down at the dark fields of France below, and whispers, "Peace is my creed. But tonight, peace wears a parachute." She jumps. The wind rushes past. Her parachute opens with a sharp snap. Below, the fields of northeast France glow faintly under the moon. She lands silently in a meadow, gathers her radio case, and disappears into the night. In the following weeks, Paris will come alive with her signal. London will hear the hum of a radio that defies an empire. And Noor Inayat Khan, daughter of a Sufi mystic, will become the voice of the resistance. A warrior who believed in peace. A poet who became a spy. A dreamer whose radio would one day be known as the radio that saved Europe. The music fades out, leaving only the soft clicking of Morse code in the background. This is Madeline. Standing by.